There we go. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming along on this lovely December morning. Hard to believe it's December. I'm looking out my window and it does look like December because it's very grey and very dreary. But thank you for coming along. I'm Ken from Solibri UK, and James is also joining us today, and we'll maybe have a few words to say later on. But I'm going to run through just this first part of the session, and then what we're going to do is we're here to look at a customer's insights into how they use Solibri. And today we're joined by Simon from Willmott Dixon. I'll do the introductions and hand over shortly. And the perspective here is from a construction company's point of view and the use of Solibri and what benefits it brings, etc. So without further ado, let's just run through a quick introduction and just set the agenda. So as I say, Willmott Dixon is the company today giving us their perspective on how a construction company uses Solibri. Short intro, tiny little bit about Solibri, and then I'm going to hand over to Simon Graham to run through things from his perspective. At the end of the session, when Simon's finished, we should have time for a Q&A session, and just in terms of sort of housekeeping and how that's going to work, etc. During the webinar, from now in fact, everybody's muted except our three selves presenting. I'll turn myself off shortly when Simon hands over. But if you have any questions or any comments as we're going through, on the side of your screen there is a GoToWebinar control panel, and in that control panel there's a questions area where you can type a question in. So as a little audience participation, make sure you're awake. Can somebody just send in a comment or question into that area just to make sure that it comes through, and then anything else after that? There we go, perfect. Fantastic, thanks guys. So that's the setup. Just tiny little bit now just on some of the background about Solibri, just to set some of the scene, and then as I say, we'll hand over to Simon to carry on from there. So let's just jump over here. So this is just setting a little bit of the scene about Solibri. Hopefully most of you have heard of the name by now. For those of you that don't know, the whole point of Solibri, the software, is to quality control, quality check construction models. And the idea of that is that the better the quality of the model, ultimately then the better the quality of the information that goes to site, and the better the quality of the building, which better buildings for everybody, better use of the tools, and it's better for the planet if we reduce waste, etc. So that's kind of the background of why we have Solibri. In terms of some of the other background, we have been classed as a spell checker for BIM because ultimately what we're doing is going looking for errors within construction models. The company itself was established in 1996 in Helsinki, and we became part of the Nemetschek group in 2015. The UK specifically was formed as a direct subsidiary in 2016, although it did exist as a different entity before that time, but we've been around for a little while now. Some of the basic stats, this year we're on track for roughly 14 million hours usage of the Solibri Office product. That's across 133 countries. And again, we're on track for about 50 million checks being run on live projects throughout this year. So that's some of the background. What I'll do now though, is I'm going to hand over to Simon Graham from Willmott Dixon, and he can tell us about the 48 million checks he's run. Give us a little bit of background on how things are from a construction company. So I'll hand over to Simon, and we'll come back later for a Q&A. Okay, so I'll just make you the presenter, Simon. It should come across. Gotcha, I can see that, thanks.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, Ken. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today. My name's Simon Graham, as Ken's already said. I'm a senior digital engineer at Willmott Dixon. I've been in construction for about 15 years now. I've worked in BIM consultancies. I've worked at architects and structural engineers as BIM specialist and coordinator and so on. And then 5 years ago, I joined the dark side, as it were, and went over to contractor side of the business. I've been using Solibri about 7 years now, and it is a significant part of my job, analysing and reporting on construction projects. So that 14 million hours or something, that statistic that Ken showed you just now, I've probably got a good chunk of that myself. So today, what I wanted to do is give you a little narrative about a project that we're currently working on, and try and put the stuff that I do in Solibri in context, and show you not just a case study about how great the project is and how wonderful everyone is, but a project that actually encountered some reasonably serious problems that threatened our delivery schedule, and there was a few issues that we used Solibri to help overcome. So this is the project I'll be talking about today. So Normandy Way Primary School in Leicestershire. It's a single-storey cross-laminated timber structure. It's worth just shy of 8 million overall project value. Despite its size, there was a few sort of limitations and a few challenges with the design of this project, specifically building services. I'll touch on some of the other challenges that sort of reared up as I continue the presentation, but just to give you another image, so this is just a quick overview of the spaces involved in this project. So, I mean, a fairly straightforward single-storey school, really, and not the sort of project that you would anticipate having any sort of problems or any sort of issues. Although, with smaller projects, as I'm sure some of you are aware, sometimes it's easy to assume that things will just go swimmingly because they're small and apparently straightforward, and that's not always the case. So just to give you an overview of what we usually expect to use Solibri for. So we use it in anger on pretty much every project we do from stages 3 to 6. The first thing we do is clash detection, obviously. So that's between all disciplines providing model data. So this is the spell checking that part of the spell checking that Ken mentioned. So depending on the size of the project and its complexity, we usually have 8 to 10 exercises of pure clash detection. There may be other validation exercises. So that is using the rule-based model checking features in Solibri. In addition to that, we have information takeoffs. So particularly at the moment, new fire regulations mean that we need a lot more information to use in our fire compliance books and schedules that we have to create now. So we are performing information takeoffs in Solibri for fire compliance, which I'll touch on shortly, and then any other quantities that people wanted. So one of the things that we're currently trying to do is sort of broaden the scope of what we're using Solibri for, because as I'll mention later, there's things people I work with, estimators and design managers, they're not actually aware of what we're capable of giving them. And then finally, if there is a requirement for COBie at the end of the project at handover, we will be validating the information in Solibri and then doing information takeoffs to squirt into the COBie database at the end of it. So that is a requirement that is becoming more and more common, and a requirement that is becoming more and more serious. So it's very useful that we've got a tool for that. So for this project, we began as we expected to. So this is a few examples of early stage clashes we've got. So you can see on the left there we have the an architectural roof beam that's intersecting with ducts and a bit of pipe work, and then we have a route that is intersecting ceiling panels there. So we go through this process of identifying these issues and logging and managing them through the issue manager in Solibri. What I've come to realize over the past years is if you want to report on this stuff, whilst you can issue reports and so on in Solibri, I've always found it better to do it live. So what I tend to do is hijack the beginning or an end of a design team meeting and go through clashes then. I've found if you set up a dedicated clash detection meeting, then not everyone shows up. So I tend to latch onto someone else's meeting and then put these issues under everyone's noses and they get resolved faster. The other thing I've noticed from working in Solibri for so long is the nature of the clashes that we get. So you can see here that these two examples are level-based clashes, right? So one of the indicators for me that a project participant may not be using the models that they've received to interrogate their design in whatever software they choose is the sort of proliferation of levels-based issues. So, I mean, this sort of goes back to when I was working at architects and structural engineers, but if someone is looking at drawings and overlaying drawings or other, 2D information or DWGs, level issues are the usually the ones that slip through the net. So when you're checking for clashes in Solibri and you see a lot of level-based issues like this, that leads us to believe that we might need to start encouraging people to look at the models more, or we need to apply a little bit more rigor ourselves to levels and checking levels in the project. So that's just a sort of lesson learned for you there. That's what I've sort of come to realise over doing countless rounds of clash detection on God knows how many projects. So this is the stuff we were using Solibri for. This is our bread and butter, as it were. And then moving on to our fire compliance book. So we're doing an information takeoff. Ideally, we want to do this at stage 3. We end up usually doing it around stage 4. But we are building a simple information takeoff rule set where we are identifying builders' work penetration components. We are extracting their dimensions and their location, and then that gets dropped into our compliance book. Now, that's something we've only just started doing recently. I'd say sort of late 2021 is when we started doing that. So previously, depending on the size of the project, it would take a design manager or someone quite a long time to extract all this information from drawings, which is how people were doing it traditionally, or asking consultants to provide schedules of where their builders' work holes are. So, I mean, what we found is that there is room for human error because often because it's a repetitive and tedious task to find all this information and put it into Excel, it gets sort of given to the person drawing the shortest straw. So there is room for human error, and also it can take quite a long time on a large project to get this information. So when we start doing it ourselves through Solibri, I can build a rule set for this in 45 minutes, and then we can extract that information immediately. And then it's just a case of applying it to the Excel book. So we've managed to save over all of our projects that we're using this on. We've been able to save a huge amount of resource by doing it this way. So that's another thing that we use Solibri for when everything is, that's something we plan to use Solibri for on all projects. But on this project, on Normandy Way, we had a few sort of bugbears, a few gremlins come out of the woodwork, quite literally. So we had issues with the design where we had limitations placed on, in particular, the mechanical and electrical services design. So, as I mentioned, with the sort of nice Paisley picture at the beginning of the presentation, this is a cross-laminated timber structure building. We received timber frame requirements about where we could put builders' work holes in particular, which added some quite severe limitations to the design of services. So we came under quite a lot of pressure to resolve those issues in a timely way. We had to ensure routes were correct and everything was correctly sized. In addition to that, when I was working in Solibri, the other challenges we had were, I'm not sure what software the cross-laminated timber model came from, but it was software I'm not familiar with. It was in an IFC format, but none of the components were classified, which meant that I had to pay some attention to my rule sets because they stopped working. So I had to change the way I worked there. And then the subsequent changes to the design meant that we had to do additional clash detection exercises with a very quick turnaround. And we also had to, in order to help out the M&E designer, we did internal M&E coordination exercises for them. So that is us taking each type of service from their model and doing a clash against the other types of service in their model. And that was purely to assist them with their own coordination. I think at the time, the M&E designer didn't have any sort of similar software of their own. So that was something we did for their benefit. To put that in context, that 8 to 10 exercise estimate that I originally gave you, I am currently on clash iteration 21, I think, for this project. So the amount of clashing I've had to do on this project is really skyrocketed, just because of the bottlenecks we've had. So I've got an example of the limitations here. Now, despite my experience in construction, this is, I think, one of the first timber structure designs that I've ever worked on. So this stuff was new to me, and I think it was new to a couple of other people as well. But this is the or part of the requirements we had from the frame designer. So you can see here we have minimum spaces for builders' work holes to the edge of timber panels. We have minimum distances between builders' work penetrations and between door and window apertures as well. So this is, like I say, this is new to me, and it was new to a couple of other people, I think, as well. But it makes perfect sense, obviously, because if you put too many holes through a timber panel, obviously it's going to lose structural integrity. So it made perfect sense. So in the beginning, I wasn't involved with this. And it was only after a sort of chance conversation with the design manager where he was sort of letting off steam, where he mentioned the specific requirements. And as a Solibri user, immediately my little light bulb went off in my head. And I thought, well, if we've got specific distance and measurement requirements, that's something that we can actually help with in Solibri. So this became a case of reacting very quickly to an issue that threatened the project's program. So originally we were expecting us to having to coordinate this design. It would take, days. We managed to reduce that time quite significantly. So I'll just go into how we did that now. So the first thing we did was build some new rule sets. So what I'd like to point out is I'm not really doing anything revelatory in Solibri when I'm making these rule sets. These are standard rule sets that have been in Solibri as long as I've been using it. So to identify issues with the builder's work holes, we used 3 rules. We had a general intersection rule, distance between components, which is measuring the distance between the builder's work holes, and component within component rules for checking whether there's any overlap or whether they're correctly positioned. So going from left to right with these images, you can see that you've got the distances there. Those are the original builder's work holes, and you can see there is a sort of unacceptable distance in those bottom 2 builder's work holes as well. There's also routes that aren't correctly positioned, so again, levels issue. The central image there is that was flagged up with component within component rule set. That is, that is a root issue. And then the issue on the right, we had a builder's work hole that was actually below the bottom surface of one timber panel. So that needed to be adjusted as well. So we're able to identify these issues and report on them quite quickly. And that actually had a very positive effect on the time it took to re-coordinate the design. So here's a couple more issues. So again, you've got these routes that are either at the wrong level, and there is a sort of unacceptable distance between penetrations. And the image on the right there, that I wanted to sort of underline the fact that this wasn't just small pipe work and those sorts of services that were affected. These were large circulation routes that needed attention. So when I'm talking about us having to adjust the design, I'm talking about some quite significant changes that needed making. Creating that rule set was quite quick, and checking and reporting on it was quick as well. And what we were able to do then was identify in a sort of live environment with everyone in a meeting, identify where the sort of clinch points were, where there was a lot of services and not much space. We could identify what was going on. We could work out some alternatives, whether we can start hanging stuff off the wall rather than having it suspended from the ceiling and that sort of thing. And we could work our way towards a more acceptable design a lot quicker. So just to give you a question to ponder on, if you have had a similar issue on a project that you've been working on, and perhaps you weren't using rule-based model checking software such as Solibri, how long would it have taken you to identify issues of that nature? You can measure things on a drawing. You can measure builders' work holes, the distance between them on a drawing. That can be quite time-consuming. You could interrogate a federated model manually, but again, quite time-consuming. So just to give you a sort of insight into, in general, how much time we saved, we had an exercise planned, which was a 2-day coordination exercise, which was one person from each discipline with the cross-laminated timber designer sort of overseeing alongside our design manager. So that would have been 2 days of meetings, essentially, looking through drawings together or looking through models together and identifying these issues just via eyesight, really. So until I had this chance conversation with our design manager, they were resigned to doing things that way. We had, that's quite a lot of resource, a significant amount of resource, and the design manager wasn't aware, which is one of the things I'd like you to take away today when I do the sort of when I summarize at the end. That'll be hopefully one of the things I'd like to emphasize. Us doing exercises like this in Solibri can have a very positive effect on delivery time. So that 2-day exercise, that became a much smaller team just doing it for one day. So it became essentially me and the design manager doing this for one day, and then communicating everything we found to the design team, who would then take away the issues and begin resolving them. So there was quite a significant reduction in the resource required to overcome this. So just getting towards the end of the presentation now, one of the lessons that I've learned from this and from other projects I've worked on. As I said, I haven't been doing anything fantastically innovative in Solibri. I was using rule sets to check builders' work holes and things. Those rules have been there since I've been using it. But our design team were unaware of what's possible. And things that can seem quite simple to us people in the sort of BIMosphere may actually have a lot of value to people in other roles. So to give you another example, I have an estimator colleague of mine who he's nearing the end of his career, and he uses a scale ruler and a calculator to work out his steelwork quantities. Now we can do that for him in Solibri in a fraction of the time. You know, on a large project, it can take him an entire day. If I can give that information to him almost straight away, then he's a lot happier, and it takes a lot of pressure off him. So just these little things, these little information takeoffs, these little checks. What I have to do now is not just use Solibri, but be a sort of evangelist now within my own company, and to, you know, our design teams, where we say, if there is something like this, this is perhaps something that we can help with. So it's a sort of soft skill that I'd like you to take away from today, or something I'd like you to take away from today, is learning what's possible, learning what you can do, and using it to not just jump through the hoops that we're used to, clash detection, information takeoff, COBie, also see how you can help other people make their jobs easier, which is why we use this stuff. That's the only reason we use this stuff, to make things easier for ourselves, in my opinion. So thanks very much. That's the end of my presentation. I'll be taking a few questions now. I hope you found it useful. But yeah, and I guess we'll open up the floor now. Okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll just switch back over to myself. And sorry, come on. It's decided to not show the correct screen, but there we go. Okay, so yeah, no, Simon, that was brilliant, thanks, and pretty much perfectly to time, so can't ask for more. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask your questions. There's a couple have come in that I'll take a look at, but there was a couple of things I picked up on that I just wanted to highlight that were quite sort of nice and reassuring. That you mentioned the rules you were using, and how there are so many rules in Solibri, but I suppose the interesting bit there is Solibri ships with 55 rules, but you've probably done most of this using 3 or 4 of them that have been tweaked to give you the result.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's the thing, that if people first look at the rules in Solibri, it can be a bit daunting because there's so much in there, but actually a few of those key rules can deliver so much with just the general intersection rule component, and with inside component, and the general distance rule, which when we actually look at the stats from pretty much from a global perspective, those are among the top rules that we use. The other one is the data rule, the property rule template with component filters. So there's this vast array, but actually sometimes the simple things give the best results. So it's always nice to see that. But if I take a look at the questions, there was one come up about fire stopping. Naturally, this panel's like the smallest panel that I can't read anything on. There we go. So if I just quickly go through a couple of these questions, if that's okay, I think they're fairly straightforward. But the first one's just asking about the does the fire openings require the designer to place an opening in the IFC model, or does it output the openings schedule from where the duct's pipes go through the wall? So I think actually that appeared before one of your later screenshots, because it looked like those had been placed in the model. Does that make sense?
Correct, yeah. They need to be present in the model if I want to do the checks that I want to do. They also ideally need to be named as builders work holes and ideally classified.
Yes. There's a little bit more that I'll talk about towards the end about our fire stopping resources, which will be coming soon, and that kind of changes things a little bit because it focuses specifically on that side of things, and hopefully will speed things up and change the way that's possible. So I'll come back onto that. Okay, and then there's another question: how do you share this information within the BIM trail, I think it is? So I guess within the BIM team, how do you share? Do you use, we have a number of tools built into Solibri, but what methods do you use? Do you use the BCF? Do you just use the Solibri files that are shared, or is there anything there that...
We do use BCF. So what I will do is I will upload a BCF report and a PDF and an Excel report usually to our common data environment. The reason I do that is purely for record keeping. I don't, depending on the number of clashes you get or the number of issues you get, I don't expect people to read an Excel spreadsheet. What I do, like I said, what I do is I tend to hijack someone's meeting and choose right under people's noses. Otherwise, they don't get looked at. And unfortunately, that is sometimes a commitment issue to the BIM process. It's getting a lot better, but it's I need, being in a meeting with someone or being on Teams with someone, I can assign things to people whilst I'm in Solibri as I'm speaking to them, and then we know that they was assigned to them at that time and date. So for record keeping and for a paper trail, that's the best way of doing it in my experience.
Yeah, cool. I like that idea of hijacking somebody else's meeting and just catching people while they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. There's another one that I guess it follows on from that one, but it's also asking, do you share digitally with something like BIM Collab? So that'll be, for those of you that aren't aware, I mentioned BCF and Simon mentioned BCF, but BCF stands for BIM Collaboration Format, and it's the open standard that allows issues to be shared across different platforms and softwares, and even push them directly into authoring tools to make things nice and easy to fix. So that's what we're talking about there. But I don't know, do you use anything like BIM Collab, BIM Track? It's just a way to share through the cloud rather than send the files manually. But
yeah, so the BCF goes into Revisto, which is the collaboration software that we use, which has variable sort of rates of commitment from various areas of the design team. So that's why I don't rely on any one particular format, is because some people will use something like Revisto and others won't.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is something we're trying to encourage, really.
Yeah, cool. There's a couple of questions again. It leads on from that. Is there's one here. It's talking about your EIR and do you set your IFC model rendition requirements? So I guess what this is about, without going into this, there's a whole big question here from Glenn. If you've got your ears on. Without getting into the whole thing, this is just really, how do you specify what information you're given? Do you do that up front, or are you just take what you get type of thing? Do you have a a standard setup of this is what's required within the IFCs?
So in an ideal world, what we specify in our BIM contract documents, we have the asset information requirements document that we give to people, which has IFC and parametric requirements in there. They can vary from project to project. So for example, if I'm doing a Department for Education job, there's going to be a lot of asset non-geometric parameters that are required. What tends to happen in reality is sometimes a lot of that doesn't happen, or some of it doesn't happen. And for instance, when I'm generating rule sets, I will find that the information I need from an architectural model, for example, it is in the right parameter. It's in they've created their own parameter, or they've called it something different, or something like that. So there is a bit of model interrogation you got to do to get things to work.
Yeah. No, that's actually leads on to I suppose the next question, which is not really a question as such, but it's just what they're saying is that Solibri only takes IFC files, and in the industry there's so many softwares that lots of people don't actually know how to export them correctly. So that is a massive challenge that we face as Solibri, because yes, we read IFC files, and the whole point is IFC is the open standard that everybody should communicate with, but there are different formats, and depending on which authoring tool creates that IFC, you can get varying degrees of output. But it also again relates to the knowledge of the people initially inputting that data into the authoring tool in the first place. So there's a lot of variables here. We have a plan for next year. We're not, as Solibri, we deal with bringing the IFCs into Solibri and running the checks. We don't really, or shouldn't really, take anything to do with how people export the IFCs in the first place. But we do have some plans for next year to run a couple of sessions to go through some of the basics to try and improve the standard of the IFC that's output from the common tools such as Revit or ArchiCAD or whatever it happens to be. So in the new year, if you keep an eye out, we have a plan for a couple of sessions to try and address those things that might alleviate some of these problems, because it is an industry-wide thing. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the questions, unless anybody else has any other questions they want to add in. I'll just check I haven't missed anything. There's clash their own native. There's a question here about allowing people to go direct to clash their own native file. I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but one other development we have is we just recently announced the Solibri Inside. It's not really a product, it's an extension. Don't know what you would class it as, but right now it's within the Nemetschek Group product suite. So we are, as Solibri, part of Nemetschek Group, and some of the sister brands are ArchiCAD from Graphisoft, there's Vectorworks and Allplan, and we do have the the first launch of the Solibri Inside extensions for those products, and what they allow the users within those products to do is actually run some of the checks that Solibri can produce, but directly within the authoring tool. So before it goes to IFC and before it comes to Solibri itself, you can run some of the basic checks. So that's something that's fairly new. If you Google Solibri Inside, you'll find the information for that. But at this stage, it's still within the Nemetschek Group suite of products. And naturally, there's a couple of others come in. So there's a question here: have you ever considered specifying a project-specific list of parameters to ensure compliance across the project? So is that anything that you would do, Simon?
Sorry, you cut out in the middle there for me.
Oh, right, sorry.
You just cut out in the middle of that question.
It's strategic. Have you ever considered specifying a project-specific list of parameters to ensure compliance across the project?
Well, we've done that in BIM execution plans in the past with varying degrees of success. So yes, it is something that I've done. Sometimes it's worked.
I think a lot of these things, going from my own experience of sitting on the boundary of these meetings and things, it's a lot of times it comes down to experience and relationships and working with the same people and getting to know how people work and what everybody's comfortable with. Sometimes it's carrot and stick. You don't want to beat them up too much, but maybe lead them. But I think it's something, just as awareness grows within the industry of what's required, it's something that does change, and I've seen the change over the last few years of how people are much more aware of what's necessary, and it's just a case of bringing up those skills elsewhere. So it's all good fun. But yeah, I think that's pretty much. There's a couple of other questions about linking to shared parameters or linking to Dynamo or Grasshopper. We don't have those links at present yet because we still base everything on the IFC and in the rule sets we have in here, but who knows in the future what that might bring. The only other thing I was going to mention briefly was just we've talked about it, we've run webinars and sort of shown some of it, but we do have a fire stopping set of resources which are in the final stages of getting ready to get out, which hopefully will be done before Christmas. That'll be our Christmas gift to the users. So there'll be a new extension which will be called BIM Coordination Plus, and that will contain the fire stopping resources, which is a whole bunch of rules, 11 or 12 of them, and they tie together all sorts of different components that make up the fire stopping resources. So this is something that's been worked on for probably the best part of a year to put together and document and give a nice inclusive set of resources. So it's all linked to classifications, to rules. There'll be external Excel sheets that allow you to define the various different parameters and everything else. So keep an eye on social media, keep an eye out for emails. There will be more information about that coming, as I say, hopefully before Christmas, as a little Christmas gift to the users. But otherwise, I think that's probably us. I don't see any fresh questions coming in, so if you do have anything, you've maybe got 2 minutes to throw one in. But in the meantime, thanks to Simon for putting that presentation together and sharing that. That was great, and it's really appreciated, and hopefully the users, everybody out there, can see that, you know, rather than us talk about it as Solibri, these are the real experiences and the benefits that it brings. So yeah, thanks again, Simon. That was great.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
And then just a little plug for the next webinar. So our idea here is we'll continue into the new year with slightly different themed ones. So the next webinar we're going to run is from an architectural perspective, and a couple of guys from Allies and Morrison are going to present that one in just under 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks yesterday. So again, stay tuned for more information on that. But otherwise, thanks everybody for taking the time to come along and stay tuned. And if there's any feedback or anything else that you want to get in touch, you can drop an email. There'll be an automatic email come out from this with the details. You can drop us a message and get in touch that way. Okay.